Welcome to your UN house. Today the title of our Bhutan Dialogues is Learning and Mentoring in the Pursuit of Meaning in Life with Daniel Spitzer. Daniel is Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Mountain Hazelnuts. He is a private equity investor. Mr. Spitzer has spent 25 years in business development and finance, and as an entrepreneur in Asia. He founded several ventures that have successfully combined financial objectives with social and environmental goals. He spent the first 10 years of his career in finance and served as managing director of a global merchant bank and partner and managing director of a major private investment fund. He serves as a director of Virtual Synaptics Incorporated. He received his BA from the University of California, Berkeley, and his master's from Stanford University. That was the Bloomberg summary. What goes on underneath Bloomberg? Perhaps as interesting as the above is, Daniel did 3 years training in a hermitage with a Tibetan master. He is married to his business partner, Teresa Law, whom I would wish to recognize today. And they have a grown son and a grown daughter. Finally, during the course of a meeting, he has at least 2 key interests. And they are, what are the key takeaways that are happening? And what are the key messages he wishes to achieve? As attentive listeners today at Bhutan Dialogues, we can choose to be similarly inspired. When it comes to our host interviewer, Dr. Karma Fonso, I've decided to change it up a little bit. You know the way these new annual reports have one page on by the numbers. So I'm going to attempt to introduce Dr. Karma Fonso by the numbers. At 13 years of age, he pretty much knew what he wanted to achieve in life. He has as many as 3,000 books in his library. He has as many as 30,000 soft copies of books that he has read or is attempting to read. Many of you are aware that we have an additional learning opportunity today and on every Bhutan Dialogues. And as you know, after the main session, this add-on session starts. We normally have tea and coffee and pretty okay momos at around 5:30, 5:15 to 5:20. After that, approximately 15 minutes later, those of you who are interested in an additional learning opportunity are most welcome to return to this space. Today we will be inspired by Dr. Sonam Sering, who is the founder, director of the Bhutan Interdisciplinary Research and Development. He is going to focus on technology and easy learning. Before I hand over to Dr. Karma, I wish to close with 3 points. Bhutan Dialogues is only as good as the inspiring ideas we receive from you. If you have a suggestion on a future speaker you would like to see here at Bhutan Dialogues, please mention it to any of the people working directly on Bhutan Dialogues, including Dr. Karma, Punsuk, and Sering Chuki here at the UN. Secondly, as many of you know, we have been recording Bhutan Dialogues, and over the coming weeks we will be bringing all of the Bhutan Dialogues we have recorded onto the internet, including today's, and making them available on the web and also on podcast. As they say in modern communications, watch this space. With that, let me hand it over to Dr. Karma.
Well, welcome, Daniel. to Bhutan Dialogues. Bhutan Dialogues is a space where we are attempting to stretch the boundaries of our thought and speech to discuss contemporary critical issues, to put a spin to it, as you have been a very long-term experienced Buddhist practitioner. We are trying to create a space for mindful listening and right speech. It's a great honor for us to have you for today's 12th session. And particularly special that here in this space we've tried to blend the spiritual with the professional, trying to find some intersection between the two. And you have a wealth of experience in this area. And one of the things that I always ask our guest speakers is to tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got to be where you are right now. And to me, you look like a Bhutanese gomchen. Half red socks. You could have come with a longer hair tied at the back, this ponytail. But seriously speaking, how did you get to Bhutan or to Asia? What brought you here and made you who you are right now?
So first of all, thank you very much. And it's good to see so many friends. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
The people in the back, you're the audience that I was aiming for. I thought I was going to be speaking mostly with Bhutanese who were half my age or younger. So I wanted to tell you about how we thought it would be helpful for me to say how I ended up here. And in some ways it was because of a, not exactly a crisis when I was 20, but I was living a very comfortable life. I was a university student, an athlete, had a nice girlfriend, and I was slipping into a future that I wasn't sure that I really wanted to have. Also, I felt like there were some things that I needed to further develop. No, it was not my wonderful wife of 35 years, but it was somebody else. And also, I had meditated for some time, but I didn't have the meditation skills I wanted, and so kind of strange, and there's a book which helped me get there, but which we'll talk about later on in this conversation. But I decided to go off to Thailand to become a forest monk, and to spend 6 months in practice as a forest monk, and also to do some research when I was a monk, and that was 1976. During the summer of 1976, there was a very bloody coup d'etat, a military takeover, and I went to Burma for adventure and to Darjeeling to do a trek. And during that trek, as I was starting that trek, I met a great master who changed the course of my life. And I ended up spending 3 years in the Himalayas.
Can I ask you who the master is? Sorry,
sure. Chatral Rinpoche, Chatral Sangitochi, who used to have a big beard and passed away about 2.5 years ago, nearly 3 years ago. Over 100 years old then. So I met him when he was in his 60s, and I was 20. And it was a meeting which will take longer than the course of this 3 minutes to explain, except it really changed the direction of my life. And I spent the next 3 years in Hermitage and studying with a kind of a passion that I'd never had before. This was something that was just deeply meaningful. And after 3 years, I faced this decision point of, do I go in for a 3-year retreat and lock the cave, the door at the cave, and do that and probably become a monk? And I took a direction which surprised many of my brothers and sisters in that world, and I went off and picked up a couple of degrees and dove into the financial world. And that was nearly 40 years ago. I had a career where I tried to challenge myself and learn as much as possible, because I had a belief that business can be positive. It can be negative, it can be positive. Money can be positive or negative, but it depends on what you're doing with it. And I really wanted to try to use business for social impact. So returned to Asia relatively early in my career and spent the last 35 years working in Asia or more.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you got to Bhutan and your current mountain hazelnut adventure?
Yeah, so 25 years ago, I met my second mentor. He was a great, older, wise, impatient demanding, imperious, Chinese-born entrepreneur who had made hundreds of millions of dollars, but was deeply committed to social impact around the world. And he felt like he had one more venture in his system, but he was too old to do it himself. And I was his horse to ride. And he was a great teacher. That venture was to make sustainable wood panels in China. And part of that was planting hundreds of millions of trees in the eastern Himalayas, in the foothills, and mostly in Sichuan province, and working with subsistence farmers. And that was really the model for what we do here. So we had about 650,000 farmers in Sichuan planting trees, and built factories and made products and opened 1,000 stores. Big company and really satisfying, and a really good model for engaging with farmers. Sold that company, which created some freedom to be able to pursue different things. I was doing other agriculture in China, and hazelnuts emerged as a wonderful opportunity, market opportunity, and also working with smallholder farmers. And Bhutan had its first election in 2008, and it showed an opening in the country where we thought we might have an opportunity to do something. And the idea of working here in a Buddhist country, Vajrayana country, where there was still very pure practice and intact environment, natural and social ecology, seemed like an incredible dream for my wife and for me. We came here and we were invited by the then Prime Minister to come and do some field work and see what was happening on the ground here in Bhutan. I see at least one friend who was there at that time, and with whom we discussed the project with the Ministry of Agriculture, and we found it, in fact, a great growing environment, and socially a wonderful opportunity. Opportunity because so many people were leaving the mountain region that we planned to plant the trees in for the city or for other kinds of opportunities, where they couldn't find meaningful ways to generate income. So there was, social fabric was being stretched and weakened. There was a lot of migratory or shifting cultivation in this part of the mountains between 1,800 and 3,000 meters. So it seemed like, wow, great opportunity to address social and environmental challenges and build a profitable business. So that was 10 years ago.
You had two different gurus to name. You had Jadra Rinpoche, who was a die-hard Hermetic master, and then a Chinese guru who was more of a social entrepreneur. When you try to blend your spiritual, meaningful life with profiteering social enterprise, do you find challenges? How do you try to reconcile the two in a very harmonious way?
Yeah, that's a great, you didn't give me that question in advance. That's a good one. Looking at the meaning of what one is doing is really important. For me, trying to understand what is my intention, what is my impact, what are the consequences, direct and unintended. I mean, in a very theoretical sense. It comes really down to awareness and thinking hard about what I am doing and what the people I'm working with are doing. These action and contemplation can easily be reconciled. There's no divide. And I used to have a well-constructed dualistic perspective on these things. That meditation was for when you were sitting, and action was when you were not on the pillow. And it doesn't really work that way, especially when you get a little more advanced in your years, your practice.
Yeah, I was struck by the point that you shared with me. I think in one of our first meetings, this is a couple of years ago, you said you came with this social enterprise to Bhutan because you wanted to support the lay practicing communities here, the Komchen culture. Yeah. I was very struck by that because I personally also think that spirituality must come down to the grassroots instead of remaining in the monastic ivory tower, so to say. So it's interesting how your social venture is really indirectly helping perhaps this practicing lay Buddhist society in Bhutan. But before we touch more on this, can you give us some brief understanding of the venture, some figures.
Sure. Okay, so Mountain Hazelnuts is Bhutan's first 100% foreign investment. It's a $30 million investment, at least first phase. It's a 30-year first phase, 30 years in venture, working with farmers planting 10 million plus hazelnut trees. Currently, we have 14,000 orchards in partnership with farming families, communities, monasteries, nunneries, and other social groups. They're scattered in 18 out of the 20 zongkaks in that mountain range area between 1,800 and 3,000. So we need enough chill so that the trees have dormancy. And the way we work basically is we find interesting farmers who either own land or they have friends, relatives, partners, or monasteries that will let them have use of the land, and we understand what their motivation and commitment is. We sign a long-term contract where we agree to provide the trees at no charge, and we provide the inputs they need, and we agree to supervise them and train them and visit every 60 days. And we agree to buy all of their nuts, and we guarantee a floor price. The price can go up from there, but we get all the nuts. They can't sell to anyone else, because providing these trees is a huge commitment, and reaching all over the country is physically really challenging and really expensive, and we are the biggest private employer in the country now, so this is a large enterprise that we need to support. And it's a business which is really, kids don't try this at home kind of business. This is a challenging kind of venture where you really need to understand the risks and not expect to get anything back for at least 10 years. It's a tree business, so the trees take a while to produce. It's about persuading farmers, many of whom have been subsistence farmers, never sold things for cash before, to teach them how to grow trees. Many of them have never grown trees before. But they're all farmers and they know how to grow things. So teaching them horticultural practices and how to understand pollination, trying to figure out as we go the best ways to function here. And we've made plenty of mistakes, which are inevitable in this kind of venture. But this is a long-term partnership where if the farmers do well, we do well.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, amazingly bold initiative, I would say. I was looking at your website, and there are lots of amazing outcomes of the project. We are employing 600 people or so full-time, more. So the second biggest employer in the country after the government, is that the right place?
Yeah, numbers are a little higher, but anyway, we're second biggest, yes.
Then there were other claims of environmental conservation through soil management or pest control, and also carbon sequestration. There's also a mention of 50 years of life of the trees in which farmers will almost double their household income. So I really want to ask you to get a good information on this. How much will you be paying the farmers for the hazelnuts? Like if I cultivate, my family, I think my family grows some trees, not a lot. If they harvest a kilo of hazelnuts, what would be the price you would be paying? And on average, what would the household making in a year?
That's a good question. So the average size orchard at this point is about an acre. And typically people plant small numbers of trees. We plant about 450 trees per acre, so it's quite dense relative to European planting or American planting. It's more like what they do in Turkey, which produces 50% of the trees. We have a floor price, which is now quite a bit higher than our original floor price when we came here. And it's a floor price that we came to in consultation with the Ministry of Agriculture, who did an economic analysis comparing hazelnut to all the other crops that are grown here. And they determined that the return to the farmers from hazelnut was more attractive compared to any other crop that they're growing, particularly considering the labor that they need to put in. Hazelnut is relatively easy as a crop, and I see at least one person here, two people who are very familiar with this. That price is around 50 cents a kilo, but it's important to understand we go and pick up the nuts from the farmers after having provided the trees and the input and supervised them and so forth. So on a overall economics basis, this is more attractive than actually any arrangement I know elsewhere in the world. We think we can make this successful because we have the scale with 10 million trees, and we have, I'd say, very efficient and relatively low-cost labor in our own company. So people we've trained up. So about 50 cents is the floor price. Based on international market prices, we can pay more.
How much would an average household make from this? Because you claim that it will double the household income. I'm not quite sure how.
Yeah,
Again,
that's a good question.
For just 1 kilo.
Sure. So calculate about 4 kilos per tree as kind of 4 to 5 kilos is what these trees produce when they're planted in that kind of density, at least. In many places, hazelnut trees average 10 kilos per tree. But with this kind of density and the kind of care that most hazelnut farmers provide here in Bhutan, which is not as intensive as in some places, let's say 4 kilos a tree, and let's say 450 trees. So who's got their calculator? So we're looking at about
2,000 per household or something.
That's right. So about
but that's about $1,000
for if they have 1 acre. And our objective is for people to have at least several acres. So if they can start making a couple of $1,000s, this is for rural income, and this is for a very part-time kind of work. It's a really significant change in the amount of cash that they have in the family. And they don't plant on their own existing productive land. We never displace existing agriculture. That's part of our agreement with the Ministry of Agriculture and actually the government as a whole. So we only plant on degraded fallow land, and there's no reduction in any other productivity, because hazelnut doesn't need great land.
And where will you be sending all this hazelnut? I was reading a piece on your project in Himachal, September 17-inch. Says, the tiny Himalayan kingdom of Bhutan seems an unlikely place to associate with Nutella. It's more likely to conjure up images of craggy mountaintop monsters and strings of prayer flags, or in fact it measures national happiness rather than conventional measure of GDP. And it goes on to say, hazelnut production, which is a key ingredient of Nutella and Ferrero Rocher chocolates, will be using this. Are we looking forward to buying Ferrero Rocher chocolates at airports with mounted hazelnuts from Bhutan?
So one thing Bhutan has done a great job of in the world of travel internationally is creating this premium perception, well-deserved, because it's an extraordinary country. Physical environment and cultural context is really remarkable. So it can provide an experience which is really special, and it's a very different approach than, let's say, Nepal, also formerly a spectacular kingdom, which has had a lot of social and environmental change over the last 40+ years since we've been visiting. Bhutan has decided to be low volume, high value, and it's very careful about positioning brand Bhutan. So long way of answering, Nutella and Ferrero. Ferrero owns Nutella. It's a great marketing company, but it does something wise about mixing everybody's hazelnuts into the same batch and then producing a product which is delicious, and people consume it everywhere. But people have no idea if the nuts come from Turkey or from Bhutan. And I think we would all prefer to know that these nuts are prepared from mountain orchards, grown in pristine conditions with a minimum of inputs, and organic or nearly organic in production. Most of our production is organic. That's the right way to do it, and that's the right way to get the best price for ourselves and the farmers. So if Ferrero is willing to pay, and I'm speaking to the microphone now, yeah, to my friends in Alba in Italy, in Piemonte, if you're willing to pay us the right price, then we're delighted to sell you the nuts, especially if you put on the branding nuts from Bhutan. Otherwise, it's unlikely that we'll be selling hazelnuts to go inside homogenized products. Bhutan is special. We think these nuts are really good. We've already tasted the quality of the nuts.
What's the alternative plant?
So a lot of people eat nuts around the world. They eat them as table nuts. They eat them as snack food. Nuts are growing as a health food product. It's not just in Europe or the States. They're also growing in different parts of Asia. China consumes about $1.5 billion a year of almonds from California. It buys 75% of the hazelnuts grown in the United States. So China, for example, is one place we can sell to. Japan buys a lot of nuts. Europe, of course, is the biggest consumer of hazelnuts, and if you speak with European friends, many of them will say hazelnut is considered the king of nuts. It's the highest prestige nut. So we think Europe's a great market once we're stabilized with our quality. And the U.S. demand is growing, but hazelnut demand is growing 6% per year, pretty consistently. It has for a long time, and projected to for the next 7 years or so. So we think it's a good opportunity.
Well, thank you for the insights into your work here, John. Now moving on to today's theme of learning and mentoring and meaningful life. You have worked with more than 1,000 or thousands of people in a way, and have employed more than 600 people in your company. What challenges do you find in employing and working with the Bhutanese? What would you say are the things that the Bhutanese have as strengths and weaknesses?
Well, so we have about 800 full-time employees on our payroll, and about 1,200 people earn their income working in what we call our value chain. And then, of course, there are the many, many thousands of people involved with the orchards. Our headquarters is in the east of Bhutan in a little village called Lingmeitang. And when we mentioned this location to our friends in Thimphu and Paro, they all said, "Oh, nice place, you go there. I'll see you when you come back and visit. I don't think I'll ever see you there." And when we spoke to well-qualified people in Thimphu, they all said, "We'd be delighted to work for your company in Thimphu." When we tried to develop that business, we were not able to find interest amongst the best qualified, can I say the best entitled, the most entitled people here. Many young Bhutanese would prefer to get jobs with RCAC or in UN House, where there are famous opportunities. The approach we take is different, and we look for people who have talent and character and commitment and potential, and will really value the opportunity and stay with us. We don't want people to be with us for a year. We want people to be with us for many years, because we try to develop them. So,
is lack of commitment then a problem with the Bhutanese employees of yours?
Not with our employees, but it's certainly a characteristic we look for very seriously. We hire people based on character. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. You want to find people who you know will be with you. And I would rather hire people who may not be the most brilliant, but definitely are loyal and aligned with their mission in life. And many people we found here in Bhutan have been offered opportunities by the government or in other ways, and they're pretty comfortable. And they may not feel the need to work that hard, or to go to a really physically demanding place and do the kinds of things we do. Trying to identify people who have the potential of commitment, making it meaningful for them, not with cash compensation, but with other kinds of training and opportunities that are meaningful and reward. That's what we try to do. We're delighted with we call it the hazelnut family, with our employees, our colleagues. But certainly, we had our experience early on when we hired people who thought it was cool to join us for a while, and then when it was too hot during the summertime in Lingmeitang, or just too far from the city, they would leave. And so at this point, our hiring is a little bit different, and we have actually a very good record of keeping people for a long time. So there are some social issues here in Bhutan where many young people have a hard time finding the right kind of work or knowing what is meaningful work. And they often follow the path which has been dictated to them. If you're a good student, you join the government, right?
There is a widespread belief or cultural mindset, say, where what is meaningful and spiritual is often separated from the mundane, worldly profession that you take up.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge to bring the two together in one occupation.
It is.
So when you have 800 people under
Yeah.
you, are most of them there really for just a wage-paying job, or do you think they are finding a meaningful life being employed by mountain employers?
Most people are there because we pay them well, and we pay them regularly. We know that. For many people, this is the first job. We have, in our nursery, many women who are illiterate and had very little formal education. And this is the first time that they've ever received a salary, first time they've ever received training, first time that some of them have become managers, supervisors, or captains and moved up the chain. So we get it. We understand that not everybody is there because they love Bhutan, they're trying to do the best thing for their country. Many of them are there simply because this is the first time they've ever had a job, the first time they've ever been treated with the dignity of being required to perform. This is a performance-oriented environment. And to put this in perspective, when we had some of these relatively, actually the lowest level manager in our organization, a team leader who may have 10 people reporting to him or her, I did a little training session with 6 of them, and the first 4 people I asked were women, and they're all locally from that environment, and I asked them, can you tell me about how you differentiate between the performance of the different people on your team? And the first 3 all gave me the same answer, and that same answer was, oh, they're all good, they all do the same work, always. And then I asked the next one, a young woman who had equal level of training. She happened to have been a national Taekwondo champion as a woman, and she was an outlier. When the guys would play volleyball together, she would just show up and play volleyball with the guys and didn't think differently about it. And she was a little bit younger than these other women. And she said, with real humility, she said, I don't see that. I see, and she wasn't as articulate as this, but she said, some people do fill many bags and some people fill not so many bags in a day. And she was really confused and wondering what she was doing wrong as a manager, because these 3 women seemed to say everybody was the same. And she was able to differentiate in performance. And so getting a sense of appreciation for doing good work or extra work and learning how to improve, but it not being something intrinsically good about you as a person or bad about you. This doesn't mean you're less valid as a person, but your work is not as good. How can we make it better? How can we make you more valuable? And how can we make the team perform better? Was a really important thing. So giving people a sense of meaningful work that they're contributing is incredibly powerful, and it became an essential piece of our culture, and finding how to do that in the appropriate way, not with an international experienced manager saying, this is good and this isn't good, but having, for example, this young woman say, I see people, she was an athlete, so she would think about it in sports metaphors, like if I'm picking a team, I want to pick that person first, that person second, that person, and she knew all this because I asked her during that meeting, so what are the names of your people? We wrote them down, and I said, so who would you pick first? Who would you pick second? And she had a very clear idea, and then I asked these other 3 ladies, do you see any differences? And then they started to say, well, yes, I guess I do. And so then the mind started opening up, and that was very useful, because it's not intrinsically, are you a good person or not, but this is about performance and learning that you can do more, and that it's worthwhile to do more.
So
sorry,
talking about
not
performance,
answering your question.
Yeah. No, you did answer. Talking about performance, I mean, you seem to run a project, a venture where education is an integral part of the venture. A lot of Bhutanese are not so driven. I think His Majesty has often pointed out that complacency can be a big problem for Bhutan. Now, how do you deal with less driven, complacent employees? Are there penalties being imposed? Are the ones who perform better being rewarded? Can you share some ideas that some of us here can also take home with us?
Yeah, so complacency is an interesting idea. A lot of people don't have a clear vision of what they can be. Most people don't, in fact. They don't challenge themselves. They don't have a process where they have an idea, this is something I could become, or these are skills I want to acquire, and for what reason. And many people accept the reality that they've been given, and they don't know that they can change the reality when they start. As they start to become productive, we show them opportunities where they can change their own lives in a meaningful way. They can make a lot more money, they can have more responsibility, more specific training. But education is a fundamental process which can happen at all levels, and challenging people that they can do more is the most satisfying thing that we can do.
So you challenge them to commit more, to perform more?
Well, not necessarily just perform more, but actually to think about what they want to do and why, and how they can develop themselves, and what are they trying to do with their lives.
So in all this, I suppose mentoring or instructions by somebody more experienced is very important. You're a business lecturer at Stanford and then running a huge team here. What kind of mentoring tricks do you use? Or what in your experience is a good one for Bhutan that we should have?
Yeah, so we've done a number of things because there are not that many of us who have business and management experience. We try to create relationships throughout the organization that are meaningful. For example, we have a program that we call the Buddy Program. So we pair a more experienced person with a less experienced person. And this is not a direct reporting relationship. This is an informal communication relationship where they can talk about their issues and challenges, their ideas for themselves, and we give training to the senior buddies so that they understand directions they can take this relationship. And it doesn't affect the compensation of the person who's being counseled or informally counseled, but it's a way that we have a structured, informal dialogue that is ongoing and provides continuity. Often we'll have young women speaking with older women. There's a lack of experienced women managers in many companies. We're about, I think, 42% female employees, and we'd like to have gender equity gender parity for a lot of reasons. As an organization, not for political reasons, but actually it makes sense, business sense for us. But having older woman speaking with a younger woman so that she's getting support and understanding and has someone she can discuss gender-based issues with is really important. So that's one aspect of mentoring, and teaching other people to mentor. Mentoring is something that I enjoy, and I take it as a committed relationship. And if somebody and I have a connection where it makes sense, then as at least one person in this room knows, I'm demanding and direct, and I require a lot in return, and I try to give everything I can. I mean, actually,
Are you sort of translating or transferring the Vajrayana Samaya culture? The sacred commitment.
You know, it's an interesting question. And the fact is, if you've been touched in your heart deeply by a teacher or by anything, then it does have an effect on you. And in the tradition that we both have studied, Your commitment to your teacher is very important. It is very important as a foundation for the ability to learn. And without that, you can't learn certain things. You can't teach yourself, and you need to have a teacher to teach you. And that's a very profound thing. I teach very mundane, simple things. So let's distinguish between these two different traditions.
But I think it's a good
but in fact,
model to use.
It
if
absolutely
you want commitment.
Absolutely. And I had my second teacher, my second mentor, was demanding as could be. I mean, he would call me at any hour, any day of the week, and would grill me and challenge me, and he was brilliant. And it was a terrifying relationship, but I knew that he loved me tremendously, and we achieved a lot together. I mean, we planted hundreds of millions of trees, and we built a very successful business with him beating me with love for many years, in fact. And I don't have his brilliance, and I don't have his beating stick, but I do try to speak in a very direct and clear way. Is that true, Karen? And I'm speaking to a friend here who asked me if I could mentor him, and it's very mundane, but it's very focused. Is that true?
That's right. Very precise.
He's not a setup here, actually, but I'm delighted to see him.
Now, my final question before we ask the audience to share their thoughts. You earlier brought up this need for a clear vision, a clear idea of who you want to be. This forum is also meant to help young people form such clear vision for their lives. To some extent, it's serendipity and chances influence our life, like your encounter with Judge Rinpoche. But I think life is generally a conscious evolution, and we need to cultivate certain traits, attributes, and habits. What would you say are the traits or attributes or positive habits that you have pursued and you have fulfilled, realized, that other people can also emulate?
Yeah, there are, let's say, habits or practices of the body. For me, physically, what do I do? There are practices of my mind, and there are more spiritual practices. On the body side, one of the key things is what you eat. And so knowing what works well for your body and what you feel is fair and appropriate to eat is really important. So if you find that eating fried foods doesn't help you feel good and doesn't help you feel clear, then don't do it.
Eat mountain hazelnuts.
Eat hazelnuts, absolutely. But I, for example, do not like to eat more than I can burn in a day. And if I don't have healthy food, then I prefer to skip meals. And if I have to skip meals for some days, that's okay. I have enough reserve, I can do that. But this is, physical health is very important. Exercise for me is essential. I realized when I was young, I was the kind of boy who needed to run around the block, and my mother would send me around the block. And for me, playing sports and so forth was really important, and I ran every day for many years. You don't have to be a runner. You don't have to be a walker or do yoga or Tai Chi, but finding some way to elevate your heart rate and to get your body in sync is important. And it's important to know yourself. This is not prescriptive, but eating the right food for yourself at the right times. And some people find that being a vegetarian in a very strict way is good, and some people find that they think they need some more meat or something else in the system, or some fish. But understand and eat mindfully, and exercise, but exercise mindfully and do it for the right reasons. Sleep enough. That's very important. And I mean, I still sometimes, if I'm too busy, I do all-nighters sometimes, because when you build startup companies, that means you work all night because you're too busy. It's not a good sign for a company, right? It's not a good sign for a company, but it's sometimes necessary when you're building a business. But generally, try to make sure you get the right amount of sleep for yourself. And if you're the kind of person who should go to sleep by 10 and wake up at 7 or 5 or whatever it is, then do that. But be aware of what you need. In terms of your mind, understand what makes you happy and understand what patterns you have. And that takes time to figure out. But most of the patterns that we fall into are patterns like telling ourselves we can't do something, or falling into negative thoughts, which are very mundane but unnecessary negative thoughts, like maybe I'm not pretty enough, or maybe I should look like this kind of model or TV star, or American president or not.
Do you do any meditation that you have learned in many years of being a practitioner, especially from your 3-year retreat?
Well,
is there something happening still?
There is something happening still. So I studied with the great Dzogchen master, and the practice is not necessarily sitting on the sofa or the pillow at all times. It has to do with the continuity of your mind. And that still remains very important to me and is a thread throughout my life. And trying to keep a balance between building a business and the other engagements, being a father of a 29 and 27-year-old child and being married and these other sorts of things, is realities, you know? I mean, there's lots of things to balance in life, but they're all part of your practice, in fact, at least for me. But I mean, really a key thing for, and I'm speaking to Bhutanese friends here, really a key thing is to think about attributes that you want to have, what you can dream about. What do you want to be? What would you like? What would make you happy? Do you want to be more educated? Do you want to be more confident? Do you want to have other kinds of skills? Do you want to have money? Then if you want money, why do you want money? And thinking really carefully in a granular way and challenging yourself. I think that can help you to find satisfaction.
Thank you very much for it. And on that note, let me invite questions from the audience.
We talked about happiness. I mean, your last concluding statement was on happiness. So my question is, which is more important? I mean, your, as an individual, your happiness or others' happiness? Or the other question is, can these two be combined together? Can these two complement each other, or sometimes this be in conflict? That you are posing your own happiness versus the happiness of others. I don't know. I mean, this is what is occurring to me. So
yeah, Dashua, thank you so much. That's a very important question from a very thoughtful friend. And I think we all know that we feel better giving a beautiful gift to somebody than receiving a gift. With people we love, when we see their happiness, we feel really great. And when we're engaging in helping other people, we feel better. And when we feel like we have a lot of money and other people don't, then we feel isolated. And personal isolation is not a form of happiness. When we go into our wisdom mind, then we're well aware that we need to move together. It's easy to fall into a question of, gee, I'd really like to have that nice new Maruti Suzuki vehicle because it looks great for myself, and I'll look kind of cool in it. And in some ways, we have to work through these different levels of physical engagement. And of course, we all need enough money to take care of ourselves or our families or social requirements. But those don't need to put you at odds with the rest of your society. A lot of people, I grew up thinking business was bad. I was very informed by the 1960s period of time when there was this idea that business was bad and business was what created the war in Vietnam, and you should protest against business. But in fact, I learned in my family and elsewhere that business, in fact, can be good, and it can be collaborative, and it can be cooperative. And I think, the central aspect of Vajrayana Buddhism is compassion. And that's something that we all try to generate in a natural way. It's not just making yourself perfect, it's making yourself naturally more caring.
If I can add, your website mentioned how Mountain Hazelnut Venture is a triple bottom line venture. So I suppose you are into a project which tries to combine one's own happiness with other people's happiness.
Yeah, and I guess I should say, well, my wife and I founded this company, invested in this company. We brought in some other investors who also believed in those attributes, and there are international investors who do care about this, and there's certainly Bhutanese investors who have these values and aspirations but may not be in a position yet to invest. So some of these are foundations of families that have made their money and realize that the money doesn't bring them happiness. What the purpose of the money is to do good. The World Bank, IFC, is one of our shareholders, and the Asian Development Bank is also. But their perspective is more institutional, that creating a private sector that's vibrant and having a few leaders helps to shape the economy of the country. But there are a lot of people who recognize that having lots of money doesn't bring you happiness, and the more you have, sometimes the more you want, if you're thinking from the wrong perspective. And it's a very tricky thing, and some of us know billionaires who feel like they don't have enough billions. And that's really terrifying, because the more food you eat, the worse you feel.
You are in the land of gross national happiness. So I'm just curious to see your perspective in how your business can actually be an influence not only in Bhutan but in other countries outside of Bhutan in terms of your ethical kind of leadership. Or are you?
Thank you. Yeah. So to be clear, we are a work in progress, and we make plenty of mistakes, and we try to recognize our mistakes as openly as possible and develop solutions. And some of these relate to natural science, and some of these relate to management systems, and some of them relate to changes in the world, like climate change, which is a real thing. So just to be clear, we're not perfect. And our social and economic relationships are not perfect, so we evolve them over time. We think that Bhutan is a great place to operate, in part because it is in some ways a pure laboratory where you can build a model. And there are a number of businesses and institutions around the world that look at us and think, okay, how can we extend this model elsewhere? And so entrepreneurs who have businesses, for example, in Africa, have come and visited to learn and see what we're doing. And these are entities that have millions of farmers who are doing similar things. We've worked with educators, for example, at Stanford Business School, to do case studies and capture what we do and try to see how to teach that. For us, we'd love for the company, as incomplete and fraught with mistakes and problems as it is, because Bhutan is a great place to learn, and frankly with from my experience, no bribery or corruption, from my experience, and a lot of aspects that make it a pretty pure working environment. It's a great place to come and learn and see. So we'd love to be a learning academy for different kinds of organizations, particularly in agriculture, from different parts of the world. Not just from Nepal and northern India that have similar attributes, but also elsewhere. Within Bhutan, we've held internship programs and mentoring programs for entrepreneurs and different young managers from different places. For example, the Loden Foundation. If you don't know the Loden Foundation, you should look it up. It is a remarkable institution. But we've taken entrepreneurs from the Loden Foundation into our company and taught them the ABCs of business, people management, accounting, planning, all these other skills that you need in order to be successful, because business is not magic. It's very mechanistic. It's about doing the right thing, having a good concept, being committed, doing the right kinds of practices, and it doesn't matter whether you're speaking Shachok or whether you're speaking Hindi or Nepali or English. You know, it's about, so for us, yes, it's a model that we want to extend, and we love that idea. And I must say, my wife, who's our chief financial officer, has said, I'll be a CFO only as long as I can spend much of my time developing these training programs and working with people, because that's what she finds meaningful.
Can I add a follow-up question to that?
Yeah.
How conducive is Bhutan's business ecosystem right now for FDIs?
Yeah. There are relatively few FDIs in Bhutan, and both the policies and the mentality of hosting FDIs is evolving. I think there's a recognition with some people that foreign investment can go anywhere. And there are very few people who are like Teresa and me, who are interested in, you know, are committed to Vajrayana Buddhism and want to work in the special kingdom and are willing to move into rare places in the mountains and in my wife's words, live without consistent power and running water for years of her life. There are not necessarily that many people who want to do that, particularly those who can invest the money necessary to do it on scale. Capital can go anywhere. And there are lots of countries in the world that are competing. And many different ministries of economic affairs, for example, in Singapore, they have an economic development board. And if they sniff you that you may want to make an investment in Singapore, then they pursue you relentlessly in a very friendly, conducive way and train you or in why their attributes are good and why it makes sense. And they know that the only reason Singapore is the way it is now is because of the investment that has garnered. And, you know, I've been going to Singapore for 40 years, and I've seen how it's transformed because of that. So if you think about it in a competitive perspective like that, Bhutan needs to be able to provide those kinds of supports so that foreign capital will come here. The right kind of foreign capital. You don't want people to come and develop dirty industry, for example, or extractive industry. But there are many people who could develop different kinds of businesses. It doesn't have to be agriculture. It could be IT services. There's a high level of English spoken here, and really, frankly, great people when it comes to customer service if you develop the training. But you need the conducive environment, and without a conducive environment, it doesn't happen. And you need people who are involved with FDI who actually have built companies at scale. Because if you maybe become a very distinguished technocrat, but never had a business, particularly a business that's an international investment business, then it's very hard to be able to communicate to international investors and persuade them why it makes sense. And also not just persuade them, but then to ensure the success is reasonably possible by that company in Bhutan. So Bhutan is changing from being a wonderful, very closed environment which was mostly led by government to now having some, let's say, a nascent private sector with a desire to have a vibrant private sector. And in 2023, we're graduating. That means that support from UN is going to be significantly different in its structure and many other institutions. So at that point, Bhutan really does need to have a strong private sector. And also, if you look at it vis-a-vis India, its current relatively comfortable financial relationship may change over time for different reasons. So developing a strong private sector, I think, is really important. Doesn't necessarily need foreign capital if there's strong capital here, but there's not really a big capital base here. And there isn't a base of human capital which is used to building businesses at scale. It will happen over time. Bhutanese, of course, are very talented and have, we have Bhutanese managers who become really excellent. And I have no doubt that this will happen over time, but it takes time.
Thank you. I think when Daniel referred to graduating, I think you're referring to graduating from the least developed countries. Ma'am, your question.
Yes. This question isn't really about business, it's more, I was wondering, when you plant all those thousands of trees, did you have any sort of problems with the spirits of the land, or sort of the religious side of taking care of nature and the, you know, the,
Yeah,
I've heard about that there are many nature spirits everywhere. And
yeah.
all this.
Yeah, so the integration of our program with the spiritual community is an interesting one, and we had no expectation of how it would evolve, but it's evolved in different kinds of ways. From one of our former nursery managers who joined us after his retirement from government and spent 5 years with us. We bring in tiny little plantlets, and we plant them in what we call our ICU, intensive care unit, where they get lots of special nutrients and the right conditions to grow. So during the winter, it's very warm, there's 99% humidity, we provide foliar, so leaf-based nutrition and many other characteristics. So he taught his team to say a mantra every time they plant one plant. And so they plant many plants in an hour. And it was mostly women doing this work. And so they would be saying mantras every single time they would do this, and they would be very focused on their performance. We were not aware of this until about 6 months afterwards, that he had taught them to do this. He's a very devout practitioner, and for him it was just natural. I was at a Lunar New Year, a Losar festival in Ngatsang, where we have one of our nurseries, and it's on land that we've leased from the local monastery. The monastery had said, you can have this 8.5 acres as long as when you leave it, you plant a hazelnut orchard for us. And so it's a very long-term engagement with them. And the Kempo from that monastery, the abbot, on a regular basis would give talks. And I was there with them, and we had the annual party. And at the annual party, he gave a talk, and he said to our employees, and at that place we have about 45 or 50 employees, he said, when you plant trees, this is the same as the highest practices that you can do. So this is your practice in action. And it was profoundly meaningful for many of our people, some of whom are practitioners and some of whom are just young people but have grown up in households. In eastern part of and central part of Bhutan, there's a very strong practice of Buddhism, and everybody grows up with faith, and it's just it's a given thing. And when an abbot, especially this really wonderful abbot, explains the significance of planting trees, it touched everybody there in a really profound way. And people had a renewed sense of the meaning of their work, whether they're a very low level or whether they're a high level. And by the way we plant, we don't plant in huge monolithic plantations. These typically are 1 acre, 2 acres. In some cases, we may have 5 acres. We don't plant just one variety. These are multiple varieties, so it's not a monoculture.
Hi, thanks so much for sharing your story. I was just wondering, we were learning so much about G&H, and I'm just curious, have you ever used that as a basis for your own reflection about how you're doing in your own company, all the 9 dimensions and all the indicators, and do you use it also as a way of learning and a way of assessing with your whole community or communities and how you prioritize your development?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you make a foreign investment here or any kind of major project, your project needs to be reviewed by the G&H Commission. And it's a serious review. This is not just a little paper chase. They really look hard at what you do. And they asked us, we thought it would be no problem because we thought, oh yeah, well, of course we're great at what we do. And we are seriously challenged on different dimensions of what we do. And you really need to have a rigorous thought. So we do this from time to time, but not enough. We recently have had some conversations with people with expertise in this area, and we think it's an important dialogue. To be challenged in what you're doing on a regular basis.
Is it meaningful? Because we really would like to know if it's meaningful for your development of your business.
Yeah, well, since we were conceived with an awareness and perspective about these things, and we did think about these when we originally designed this venture. It does inform our perspective, but to keep on being critical as you go and see how you can work on different dimensions. For example, working with local community health. That's something which is really significant, and that's an initiative that Teresa leads because she has background in that. But it's just one example. So being challenged in that area and having collaborative thinking is really important, and you need multiple stakeholders and also outside people who, and when I say challenge, I don't mean in a negative, provocative way, but I mean like, have you thought about this?
Exactly, reminded.
And so when we invite visitors to come visit us in Lingmeitang, and most people don't want to go that far, but I was in fact. Dr. Karma, being an Urap, of course, they own most of the land in the area where we are, traditionally, in fact. But we love to have visitors, and we love to share openly, but we always charge them. And the charge that our fees are very standard. We charge them 3 suggestions. Every visitor who comes has to give us 3 serious suggestions. And these are really valuable to us.
Good.
Well, that limits your number of visitors. But, Madam, you have the last question or last say.
And I apologise in advance for being negative and cynical, particularly from the last question. But what do you do about poor performance in your business? I mean, tell me I'm just wrong and it's Bhutan, but in my experience elsewhere, there is always someone who derives greater meaning, finds more value in what they do outside work. It's all very well offering mentoring and training and encouragement and support, etc., etc. But they can say, thanks, I've got to get home to my family, my community roles, there are more things in my life than work, and they will not perform. But what do you... Does that happen?
It does.
What do you feel about it?
No, it happens all the time. And being a good performer doesn't mean that you work all night. It means that our jobs have very clear work hours, and almost everybody follows those work hours. And so in the East, our work hours from 8 until 5, and people are out at 5 o'clock. And when they are during work hours, they are supposed to apply themselves to the best of their abilities. Not everybody performs well, and it's really important to try to figure out why people don't perform well. Sometimes it's something really simple that hasn't been diagnosed. For example, we recently we conduct health programs for our employees, and we recently had an eye test, and we found that many people in our nursery didn't know they needed glasses. And glasses are available free of charge in Bhutan, but they never knew that they needed glasses, and so they were doing a lousy job. So we try to understand what is the reason that they're not doing well. Is it because they actually physically can't see? Sometimes it's that conceptually they can't see. So some of these 3 managers I was talking about who couldn't differentiate, they couldn't see the differences in colors. They didn't have those 11 Eskimo words for snow, for example. They only had 1 word for employees, which was good, even though they had 11 people, and with a wide range of colors of performance. It wasn't until this Taekwondo young woman said, explained that she saw lots of variation. So we try to diagnose what the issue is, and we try to work with people. Sometimes you have more explicit sort of things, and it's not always, but it tends to more be males and females do bad things. You know, we have very clear guidelines and company rules, but we have some things that are really essential to our company. For example, respect amongst gender is really important. If people trespass against these rules, we have to make sure that they understand what the rules are, and that they have warnings, and they have training, and the real consequences, and the consequences can be much more serious. And we do have people get put on probation, and they have training when they're on probation, and they have very active follow-ups, and we certainly have let people go after they've been on probation and they've had multiple infractions, and it seems to be an ongoing. We do our best to help people change, and most people want to change and succeed, but not everybody does, or maybe it's not their time to, and that is something one has to accept. And you know, when you're speaking about, you know, we've hired more than 1,000 people into the company, and some people have left on their own, for their own volition. Some people have left because their wife or husband has moved someplace else, or something else has happened in their own lives. Some people have left because they've worked with us for a number of years and they can get a fancy job in the big city, like Timbu. In fact.
Exactly. Moving up.
Some people probably needed stopping as well. Sorry, I'm just
Yes, sir.
But now, to do our regular ritual, I have my last question for you. Bhutan Dialogues offers 2 books of your choice as a token of appreciation. We asked you to name the 2 books and also give reasons as to why you chose the 2 books. If you don't want to mention these books, can you share your favorite book that you recommend other people to read as well?
So these aren't my favorite books, but these are books that were really significant to me, especially in my arc. And the first one is The Wheel of Life by John Blofeld. And it was the first edition. It was written and I read in maybe 1975. Blofeld was a leading scholar of Taoism and Buddhism, translator in Chinese, but in other languages. And he was a committed seeker and a very serious seeker. When I read him, it resonated in a really significant way for me when I was, I was just turning 20, and I left 2 months later and took my savings and headed off to Thailand to become a forest monk, and so I owe this, I owe a debt to him, and I think this book is particularly evocative, at least it was for me. There was a great Tibetan master named Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and he wrote many books of poetry, and he was a very provocative thinker. This book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, was important for me when I was coming out of hermitage and trying to decide, thinking about my motivation to, should I become a monk? Should I think about the physical aspect of what I do, or should I think more about how I should live my life? This book is a deeply challenging book, and it was really useful for me at that inflection point after 3 years in hermitage when I was trying to figure out what matters and cutting through the ego attachments to, well, am I good, am I bad, what's the right thing to do? This book worked for me at that point.
Well, thank you very much, Daniel, for all the information, insights, knowledge, advice you have. And I hope the audience, particularly the young Bhutanese audience, have got lots of things to take back home with them. I again end the session normally with a traditional Bhutanese piece of wisdom. Having covered social enterprise, about meaning in life, what trying to help others, combining one's well-being and other people's well-being, I thought this proverb that my father shared with me a long time ago, is most appropriate. A liberal, free translation would be, one's own well-being will naturally arise if one contributes to the well-being of others. So with that note, thank you very much for coming to Bhutan Dialogues and enjoy the refreshments in the foyer.